Hello, everybody. This is Pascal again from Neutrality Studies, and I just want to give you a quick update on what happened in the German elections because the preliminary results are out, and they, on the one hand, look quite dramatic. On the other hand, they might be a bit of luck for the establishment parties. On the one hand, one of the things that was expected, and which is a huge blow to the establishment, is that the AfD, the Alternative für Deutschland, um, gained over 20% of votes. This was expected, but it is huge, and it is a huge improvement over their performance in the last elections, more than 10% more that they gained. So they doubled their voter base or the result. On the other hand, the SPD of Chancellor Scholz, right, the current chancellor, were really hammered down, right? They went from being the largest party previously with about 25%, we'll look that up in a moment, down to 16.41 as far as the current state of affairs goes. I must say also that there might still be slight changes coming out in these results. I'm reporting to you here at 3 p.m. on the next day in Japan. It is still the very early morning, the day after the elections in Germany, and there's some part of the counting is still being done, but by now the trajectory is almost clear, although one of the ones that I'm waiting for the most that we get the ultimate result on is the BSW vote with 4.97, and I will explain to you in just a second why these 0.03% might be very important, whether they actually materialize or not. But if the result stands as it is at the moment, the CDU-CSU, the Black Party here, that's the party of previous Chancellor Angela Merkel, and their lead candidate for the next chancellorship, the chancellor would be Mr. Merz. Um, show you that in a moment as well. I mean, they came out as the winners with a strong result, actually, 28.5%. Although I must say, historically speaking, the CDU, CSU, they used to be close to 50% or more. So the 28.5% is actually, for like historically speaking, not a very good result for that party. But regarding that they were in the opposition and that they were even smaller than the SPD before, this is well, it was also expected, but it is overall a good result for them, and it's certainly strengthening the hand of Mr. Merz, who now has the strongest claim to the next chancellorship as it was expected. Um, Something that's important here is not just that the AfD, which has been demonized as a right-wing nationalist, almost neo-Nazi party. I mean, some people in Germany keep equating the AfD with the Nazis. I think that is quite a mistake. It's the AfD is a completely different breed of party. It is certainly nationalist. It's certainly conservative right wing, but it is to me a utter horrendous mistake to equate them with anything resembling the brown mustache man. Although the AfD is, of course, an anti-immigrant party, and it is. There is a lot of AfD exponents, people who actively make politics of like anti-immigration politics and anti-Muslim politics. That is also true, but the AfD is a very it represents a broad spectrum of people, and most importantly, we now know it represents a fifth of the electorate, which makes the talk about banning this party just even more crazy. And that's also one of the things that actually the Americans recently told the Germans, that the new Trump administration wouldn't want to see that Germany actually bans one of its biggest opposition parties. So for the AfD, this is a big victory, and they are celebrating. They celebrated the last night. We saw that in the news. But now, what does this mean? Also, the Greens, they lost lost they lost quite a bit. We'll go and look at how much that was in a moment. The left party is the one surprise. The left really managed to gain a lot of votes, and this is a surprise, especially because the BSW party over here, which for some reason is listed after 4.33, but I suppose that's just a mistake in the graphic or for whatever reason. But the BSW party used to be part of the left, Die Linke. So they split from them. And despite the split, the left managed to still gain a rather a strong vote because in the last election, they they barely made it to 5%. They barely made it. They were lucky to make it to 5 because of some direct mandates, but this time they came back and even stronger so, even without the people from BSW. And now let me the FDP over here, the number, yeah, the yellow ones. I mean, they were even part of the previous coalition government, and that they got only 4.3% is a huge slap in the face for this party, which did so extremely poorly. Now, let me tell you why this is quite dramatic over here, that we have, by the way, one more thing, AND over here. Sorry for this being in German, but AND over here means just others. So there's a couple of other candidates and direct mandates and so on that managed to get 4.5%. But the important thing here is that these two parties, BSW and FDP, if the result stands as it is, will not be represented in the Bundestag, in the German parliament, because the rules of the German parliament are that in order to be represented, if you're a party, you need to get at least 5%. And this, for both of these parties, would be dramatic in the sense that they wouldn't make it. And for the FDP, even more so, because they were part of not only the last Bundestag, but they were part of the last um, government. Let me show you this here. And as a as a political scientist and a associate professor at a university, using Wikipedia is nothing that I will ever allow my students to do. But when it comes to election results, Wikipedia is just one of the fastest out there to aggregate everything and to make graphics. So the election results aren't out even for 24 hours yet, and Wikipedia already gives us aggregate graphics. So for this very tiny little space here, I would argue that Wikipedia is a useful tool in order to get aggregate results of what is known so far. But also here still, because these results might still change slightly, there might be changes in this. But so far, here, let me show you this, the who won how much. You see how this is how much the FDP lost compared to the last election in 2021, so 4 years ago, right? The FDP lost 7.1%, and the FDP was part. Let me show you another one of these charts, useful charts from Wikipedia, where you can see the different governments. So for everybody out there who's not familiar with this, especially if you're from the United States, the way the system works in most European countries, especially in Germany, but most European countries, they are the government itself. So the prime minister, the people that we see on TV most often, the chancellor and the different minister of the economy and of finance and so on, they are not elected directly by the people, but people elect the parliament, and then whoever manages to reign in parliament, because they have a majority, whoever controls parliament, then gets to send their people into the executive office, right? This is why the representative or the leader of the biggest party usually becomes the chancellor of Germany. Previously, that used to be Angela Merkel and then Olaf Scholz, and this time it looks as if though it will be Mr. Merz, because Mr. Merz now leads the biggest party. The biggest party in the German context is called Union, because it's a union of two parties These parties are called, the party is called CDU and CSU. This is the Christian Democratic Union for the entirety of Germany, and for the state of Bavaria, it's called the Christian Socialist Social Union. Um, but this is essentially the same party. Now, what you're seeing here is the representation of how you can view the last couple of governments of Germany, right? If this is government number 25 since the end of the Second World War and the reestablishment um, of the Federal Republic, then Merkel was leading four different cabinets because four times she went there were elections, there was a new Bundestag, and she changed the coalition with whom she worked together in order to get more than 50%, right? In her first government was a government of her own party, the Blacks, the Union Party, together with the SPD. And after 4 years, she created another one, her party plus the FDP, then again her party and the SPD, the Reds, then again her party and the Reds. But after the after an election, but basically essentially the same coalition that together then has control, or usually has control over more than 50% of the Bundestag, right? Because in this little schematic here, you can see it quite well. If you think of the Bundestag of the parliament as this distribution of seats, what you see is that now in this new parliament that we're going to have, 152 of the seats are going to be occupied by the AfD, 208 by Mr. Merz's Union, 85 by the Greens, 120 by the SPD, by the Social Democrats, and 64 by the left. So that then is the party spectrum that's represented in the Bundestag. And whoever manages to command 50% or more of this will basically make policy, because the whole point in the European system is, where you have a plurality system, that these different parties, they work together, and either somebody wins more than 50%, or two or three parties that together have more than 50% start working together, and they then agree on who they want to have in the executive branch, in the government, who they want to have as a chancellor, who they want to have as a minister of finance, minister of the economy, and so on and so forth. And so while in the United States, the executive branch, the president and the vice president are directly elected by the people, and then they decide, or the president decides on who he wants on his cabinet, and then creates a strong executive branch. In the European system, and Germany especially, it's parliament that then sends people up there, right, in order to do what in the United States the president and his cabinet does. Now, the question then in the German context is always who will end up working with each other. Since you can see here, none of these parties has an absolute majority. The question is which parties will start working together, and now they are entering into the so-called coalition phase, where they do deals with each other and talk to each other in order to figure out who is willing to work with whom. And these coalition talks in Germany, they can take quite a stretch of time. They can be 2, 3, 4 months long until you get an agreement. And usually that's then a written agreement that's most parts of the agreement are then usually are somewhere are kept somewhere. Not all of it might be published. Some of it might be published, but the point is that they have to come to an agreement of what they want to do and how they want to configure themselves, and at what costs, right? For instance, the party that gets to nominate, to have the chancellor, to send their leader to be the chancellor, then usually has to accept that the second largest party gets to have the minister of finance, because the minister of finance is actually basically the second strongest or second most important portfolio in the German context, because these different ministries, they are much more independent if compared to how the cabinet in the US works, right? Where all of the cabinet, the secretaries are all under the direct control of the president, and the president can hire and fire them at will. I mean, okay, Congress has to accept them as well. But the individual cabinet secretaries are very much fireable. In the German context, that is a different story. Not only because the institutional and the constitutional setup is such that it basically says, okay, the different responsibilities that the chiefs of that are in the ministers that are working on these different portfolios, they get a lot of power. It's also for political reasons. Just imagine, right? If let's say the blacks, the greens, and the reds start working together, and they do so under the agreement that black gets the chancellor and red gets the minister of finance. If black, the chancellor, fires the minister of finance, or the minister of finance withdraws out of protest over something black does, then the chances that red in general will just blow up the coalition and say, like, we are not going to vote with you anymore in parliament. These chances are quite high. Those are political chances. And then you could have in parliament a moment when a majority of them vote against the chancellor, a so-called vote of non-confidence, and basically get rid of the chancellor, right? And then force a new election and a reconfiguration of the Bundestag. So there are several reasons for which in the German context, the leaders of these parties and the leaders who then end up going into government are more independent than, let's say, in the U.S. context, where the president has a relatively strong control over his executive, of his sub executives, right? So the the dramatic part of these two parties here, the FDP and BSW, is not just for the individual part. It's not just dramatic for the individual parties. It is dramatic because um, if neither of them actually gets to really be represented, you will have uh, nearly 9%, more than 9%, nearly 10% of the electorate that are not really represented in the new Bundestag, and especially BSW. This would be a very bitter pill to swallow because, sorry, you see, in the last in the last election, they weren't even there. In 2021, they didn't exist yet. So Sarah Wagenknecht, the leader of this party, she only split the party in late 23 or early or in 2024, actually a year ago, from the left, and they almost made it into the Bundestag, and that would be quite significant because 5% of the overall total of 630 seats, although these 630 can vary slightly depending on the year, um, would be around 30 seats, right? There would be around 30 seats that they would hold if they actually managed to get in the first place. So it's 30 or nothing in a way, or 31 seats or nothing. But now it looks as if though it's nothing, and these 30 seats could make a difference also on the arithmetic. But it looks as if though if it remains at 4.97, then this party will fall out, will be removed completely from. They will not be part of the next parliament and not get to vote in the Bundestag at all. On the other hand, what does this leave us with? It leaves the larger parties, or the remaining parties, with slightly more seats or proportionally more power, because they don't have to share power with another 30 and 20 or even 60 seats from smaller parties. And actually, it creates an arithmetic in which it might be possible for a two-party coalition to rule Germany, right? So we have here. What do we need? Sorry, I need to go to this one again, because it's a little bit misleading. If you look at this, and you might think that if the CDU/CSU, if the blacks cooperate with the reds, then 28 plus 16, that is 44, so it would be 45 point something, that this would not be enough to govern, right? You would think from just the numbers, but this is the number of the votes that these parties got. Now, the important thing here is that in order to govern, what matters is the proportion that you get in the Bundestag. And if things remain as they are at the moment, you see that that the 28%, 28.6% that the union got will translate to 208 seats. And the 16.4% the SPD got will translate to 120 seats, which together will be 328, right? If my math is correct, 328 out of out of 630. And in order to govern this thing, in order to outvote everybody else, what you need is more than 50%, and 50% of 630 is 315. So in fact, 228 seats would be enough to form a majority government, and basically the SPD and the CDU could work together in order to continue governing. And now this would be somewhat of a classic government. So let's go back to this page over here, right? You see that we've had this constellation before. We had this constellation under Angela Merkel 1, we had the constellation under Merkel 2 and Merkel 3, right? Black and red in a tandem, uh, governing the country. So the in theory, it would also be possible to create to actually also add the Greens. But why would you add the Greens if you don't have to, especially if the Greens lost so much? But CDU, CSU, SPD, Black and Red is now a new option for Germany, a relatively classic one. The problem here, of course, is that Mr that this would include the SPD, and the SPD is the one party that now lost so much, right? It is pretty clear that from this, I mean, minus 9.3%, like losing so many seats, that the SPD at the moment is not a popular party. They are struggling with their popularity very much. So, question is whether the CDU actually wants to approach them, right? Do they want to work with do they want to try to work with the SPD and with Olaf Scholz? Or although Olaf Scholz just last night announced that he would not be part of the coalition talks, he would not lead those. So he's probably out for good of the next government of Germany. But in theory, one thing that we could think about would be the 208 seats plus the 85 seats of the Greens. That would be 293, right? Plus the 64 of the left. In theory, that would also be enough in order to create a majority government. And you might think that the left is relatively small with its 64 seats, but look at historically at how these coalitions work. I mean, sometimes you have small parties like the FDP. Let's see if we can see how this one worked. We have here. No, we don't. We don't actually see the distribution. But the FDP was always quite small. It was always in this like around the 10% or 13% mark. It was a junior partner with working with the CDU with Merkel, and also in the previous government of Mr. Scholz, right? Scholz's government is split here because the FDP actually withdrew its support for the coalition, and since November 2024, so in the last 3 months, the governing coalition was actually only between the Greens and the SPD, right? Because the FDP withdrew, so this is the different configuration, but it's actually just the leftover configuration of the previous 2021 configuration, which was SPD, Greens, and FDP. And the FDP was the junior partner. It was more junior even than the Greens, but it was structurally important enough to be taken into the camp. So this can happen. It can happen that a smaller party, even if it has relatively few, even not even 10% of support, that it becomes a coalition partner, just because this is one of the possible configurations to get to more than 50% of seats in the Bundestag. And thereby you can then together you can pass a budget. Together you can send your people from all of them to the government, and you can express your confidence to the government, right? So this is it wouldn't be the first time that a smaller party might enter such a small party might enter the 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 government. But but of course that would be difficult negotiations. Naturally, the more parties you add to a coalition, the more difficult it gets. I also must say one more possibility is that you get a minority government. You don't necessarily need 50 more than 50% in the Bundestag. There is no rule about that. You could have less than 50, you could have just 45 or something, as long as you convince the enough other parties not to vote against you, even if they're not in your government, then you can also try to form a government. Now, historically, all over Europe, actually, these minority governments are very unstable. Especially in Spain, they happen frequently, but then they frequently also collapse again, way after much less than the 4 years that they're supposed to rule. So I wouldn't bet on that. I would now put my money on the blacks and the reds actually getting into coalition talks. And if those fail, then it would be the blacks and the greens and actually the left. The one thing that all of these parties make clear is that they do not wish to work with the AFD. So even though the AFD has 152 seats, and although in theory you could think about either AFD plus black or AFD plus um, nope, AFD plus SPD wouldn't be enough, but AFD plus black would be in theory a possible constellations. But the CDU and the other parties, they already said we are going to have a firewall erected against them by just not talking to them. We're just not negotiate with them. Now, you might think this is unfair. You might think this is an exclusion of the will of the people, but that's how the system works. If any one party is so disliked that it cannot form any coalitions, any friendships in parliament, then well, that's what it is. So the AFD will, for almost 99% certainty, be in the opposition, will be the largest opposition party. And it will be loud, it will be noisy, it will, of course, increase its own platform and its own visibility, but it is almost impossible for them to actually become part of the governing coalition just because the others were so clear that they will not work with them. Yeah, that is it. Maybe just let's look a little bit at previous configurations, right? We also had a long period of black and yellow and FDP working together, which is again why this defeat of the FDP, now not even getting into the Bundestag anymore, is so huge. This party really got hammered. I mean, they got hammered worse than a completely new party that emerged out of nothing, and well, is, if anything at all. I mean, the leader of the party, Sarah Wagenknecht, already said, even if we don't make it into the Bundestag, we will continue as a party to try to do better next time. And next time might come around earlier than we might think, because if these parties here are not able to actually come up with a coalition agreement, because the piece of paper that they will work out, the plan that they will work out, then it is possible that we get to new elections again in the near future. Although I must say, from previous experiences, usually even when talks are difficult, the Germans manage to somehow come up with a coalition that will hold on for at least a couple of years. And not move immediately to re-election. So since now we have in my mind, two possible configurations, black and red or black plus green and the left, the chances for one of these to emerge, especially black and red, I think are relatively high. In any case, what we will see is Chancellor Merz from the blacks then ruling supreme. The question would be like, what would the SPD or the other two get in return? But yeah, that's where we stand as of now. The one thing to see is whether or not magically 0.03 percent of votes would appear for BSW or not, and thereby we would have one more small party in the Bundestag. Let's see what happens. This is the update from my end. Thank you very much for listening.